Whether on the field, on the court, or on the balance beam, there's more to winning than the final score. Hi, I'm Patrick Manning of Black Desert Resort. We recognize the effort it takes to succeed. That's why we are proud to partner with the Utah Checkdown, the podcast that tells you the story before the game, then gives you a recap of what happened when it's all over. The grit, the glory, and the disappointments. Join us for stories of Utah's finest athletes and coaches. Thanks for listening.
You're listening to the Utah Checkdown Podcast. And now your host, Josh Furlong.
Welcome back to another edition of the Utah Checkdown Podcast. I am Josh Furlong. Happy to be back with you today, talking football once again. So let's jump into it, but first let's talk about our sponsors, Black Desert, who are helping with the KSL.com Beyond the Game video series. The videos highlight various athletes and give an inside look into their life. Recently, we talked with former Utah offensive lineman Garrett Bowles about how a second chance at life allowed him to pay it forward to troubled youth. You can check out that video and many others on KSL.com. Black Desert is a new resort destination in St. George that features a championship Tom Weiskopf 19-hole golf course that combines a private club feel with destination resort golf amid lava fields and 360-degree vistas. Black Desert is changing entertainment in southern Utah, and they're just beginning. Black Desert, where remarkable is within reach. Home of the Black Desert Championship PGA Tour. All right, we are back to football. So obviously this last weekend was a great weekend for Utah. You go into Stillwater, Oklahoma, and you get yourself a win, 22-19. Obviously, anybody that saw that game understands that score is not really indicative of how the game played out, but that's the score nonetheless. And I don't think there's really any worry from people about that, right? So when I got home from Stillwater, I was staying in Tulsa, and so it took me about an hour to drive from Stillwater once I was all wrapped up writing my stories and stuff. I drove out to Tulsa and got to my hotel, turned on ESPN because I like to hear what other people are saying about the games that I'm covering and just kind of seeing how it works. And I was surprised to see that a lot of people were taking this game as like this is the game that Utah arrived in, right? Maybe not arrived is not the right word, but this is the game that Utah showed that it can stand toe-to-toe with anybody in the Big 12. And that doesn't come as a surprise to anybody who's listened to this podcast or has been a Utah fan for a long time. Utah obviously believes that they can stand toe-to-toe with any of these teams, and you didn't need to go on the road to Oklahoma State and showcase that. But I still think it was a good test for Utah. We'll jump into a lot of all it is, but I think it's a great opportunity that gave Utah kind of its bearing in the Big 12 and kind of showed what it's all about, right? Especially being able to do it without a few key players and all that stuff. So before that, though, with the win, Utah jumps up to number 10 in the AP Top 25 rankings. They're anywhere as high as I think John Wilner has them at 4. He's the highest AP voter to somewhere around, I think 11 is the lowest, if I remember correctly. At least that's the average of people voting is 11. My personal ballot, I had them at 9, so I'm right there in that range. So this is a team that is considered a top 10 team by many people in the country. Have they fully looked like a top 10 team? I don't know that I have seen that. I think we're still looking more on potential. I think the reality is if you're looking at this team, you see a team that even hasn't fully reached its potential, and they're still doing this, the way that they're doing it, right? It hasn't been pretty all the time, right? Like, the score 22-19, that doesn't look pretty in terms of, style points, and style points don't really matter anymore, so I don't know that matters, but you've got all these things that kind of play into that, and I still think you're getting a lot of people that see this Utah team. They understand what they're all about. They understand that if everything continues to go well for Utah, there's a good shot that they can run the table in the Big 12, right? Obviously, there's some crazy results in the Big 12, and anything can happen, and injuries or whatever that may be. But I think you're getting more, even from a national narrative, that Utah, it doesn't really matter who's going to show up on game day. They're going to find a way to win. And as long as they have that culture that Kyle Whittingham has built, they're going to find a way to do whatever they can to win. I've retweeted a few different things. Scott Van Pelt recently, yesterday is my latest one, about kind of how he was saying that Utah puts teams in a blender, right? They just go out there and do it. I've heard other people on different podcasts and other things say that that Utah, they're just that consistent team that it doesn't matter if Cam Rising doesn't play. It doesn't matter if these other guys don't play. There's going to be this consistent level of play that Utah is always kind of going to be there. So with that said, that doesn't mean that Utah can just continue to do what they're doing right now to get to where they want to be, and meaning the Big 12 title game and into the playoffs. Obviously, this team has to improve, but I don't think that they're that far off, and I don't think that's I think a lot of that is just based on kind of how this has been made up and how everything's gone on. So I'm curious to see how this all shakes out, but so far so good from the ranking side of things, which, is an unofficial kind of barometer of how your team is viewed. Utah's doing well, right? You want to be in those rankings. As I've mentioned before, it doesn't really matter where you're ranked per se. It's more a matter of where you are in relation to some of these other teams and other conferences. So, the Big Ten and the SEC are likely going to jockey for the number 1 and number 2 spot. That's just the nature of what it's going to be, and they have the best team. So I don't think that's something that it's like, oh, well, they're going to take it. They legitimately have the best teams in the country right now, right? You've got a Texas team playing great. You've got a Georgia team that's going to play Alabama this week that's doing phenomenal, and we're going to see how these shake out. And there's room for teams to jump up. Ohio State's looking good, but, what are they going to look like when they face their real first test, that kind of stuff. So we'll see. But I think the real jockeying for position is that 3 or 4 seed, who can get the 3 seed between the Big 12 and the ACC. Right now, it's kind of this up and down movement between Utah and Miami. Miami's looking really good with Cam Ward. I think they've done a really good job of unlocking his potential there from what he was at Washington State. This is going to be a fun competition to kind of see it come down to the wire. At the end of the day, if you're in one of those top 4 seeds, you are at least in the playoffs. You made a first round bye. I mean, that's what you're there for. You still got to win your conference, all that kind of stuff. But it's still a good situation, good position to be in for Utah. Beyond that, you want to be as high as you possibly can to make sure that you can get an at-large bid. If Utah gets into, let's say, the top 5, I don't know that that'll happen. It gets pretty crowded up there right now. But if Utah gets into the top 5 and makes it to the Big 12, excuse me, man, I'm really struggling. Big 12 title game, and then happens to lose that game, barring it being some blowout or some situation, there's a good chance that Utah stays within that and gets an at-large bid. So be interesting to see. We're still so far away from that, but always interesting to kind of see how that goes. So enough of that. Let's jump into the game. As I mentioned, Utah comes away with a 22-19 win. That game was 22-3 with 6 minutes left in the game. And anybody that was watching that understands kind of where it was. Brant Keithy gets that touchdown. Isaac Wilson hits him in stride. The defender falls down, and Brant Keithy walks in, which is, I had to watch that on replay because we were making our way down to the field at that time. They always take the media down somewhere between 7 to 10 minutes, or 7 to 5 minutes, going down to the field so we can do our post-game interviews and stuff like that. So we got down to the very end got down to the field, and we were on the end zone opposite of where that throw was made. And from my angle, it looked like it was just this beautiful pass, and Keithy gets it and beats the defender and is right there in the end zone. It took me getting back up to the press box to see that Keithy walked in, which was pretty remarkable. It was kind of funny. Yesterday he said, "What was I going to do? Run in?" He was on the ground, so I just decided to walk. I mean, it's kind of this low key savagery, I guess you could call it, that he just was gonna do whatever he was gonna do, and it's fun. It's part of the game. So anyways, he scores that touchdown, or he gets the touchdown. 6 minutes left in the game. Oklahoma State, they really didn't have any answers at that point. You could sense the shift, not even the shift, but just kind of the continual development of Utah just overwhelming Oklahoma State. The fans were heading to the exits. It was very much so turning into a pro Utah crowd, just because of fans were upset. They were booing their own team, different things that way, and so it became a Utah home field for that last few minutes. But for the fans that did stick around, Oklahoma State did fight back, right? They weren't willing to go away, and Utah obviously pulled off the dogs a little bit. They weren't pressuring as much. They weren't doing all the things that made them so successful in those first 3.5 quarters. This was a team that, they sensed it. They saw the score. They understood what was needed and got a little bit more into that prevent defense that, if this was a much closer game, there's no way Utah's playing that. So take that for what it's worth. But, Utah still allowed 2 touchdowns late. Alan Bowman, who looked terrible in the first part of the game, was actually benched at halftime. It just completely changed, right? Everything was much more relaxed. He was able to work, and they moved down that field with ease. And considering that high tempo that they utilized, it was real easy. And so it made the score look closer. But this was an impressive win for Utah, mostly because Oklahoma State just doesn't lose a ton of games in Stillwater. This is kind of, it's not quite to the same record that Utah has at Rice-Eccles Stadium, but it's fairly similar. And they also have the added benefit of having a 6-game winning streak over ranked opponents. And some of these opponents aren't slouches, right? It's like in Oklahoma, a rivalry game where it's going to be tough. And so they've done a phenomenal job in Stillwater of being able to beat good teams, ranked teams that obviously are going to be more similar to what Oklahoma State is. And Utah found a way to get it done with a freshman quarterback. In his his second time playing as a starter, he finds a way to get it done and becomes the first true freshman quarterback at Utah to beat a ranked team, and he does it on the road nonetheless. So a lot of good things for Utah coming from that. Obviously, like I said, it's a tough place to play, but they were still able to do it. In the end, Utah had 456 total yards. Oklahoma State had 285. The crazy thing about that is going into those last 2 drives, passing yards alone, Oklahoma State only had 127 total passing yards, right? Which was not far away from what they were in total yards. They had something like 45, 50 rushing yards. So it wasn't much, right? Ultimately, it was roughly around 150 to 175 total yards for the game. And they made a bunch of that up in those 2 drives. This was a Utah defense that absolutely controlled the game. They were physical. They did everything that they needed to. The total time of possession was pretty remarkable. Utah had the ball for 42 minutes and 26 seconds. Oklahoma State had it for 17 minutes and 34 seconds, which is pretty wild. It was just like, these games. So this game, 100 degrees outside, and anybody that attended that game knows how brutal that was. Much more than I did because I was in an air-conditioned press box, so I can't sit here and complain. I got to experience some of that very late in the game and then walking to the game, but not sitting in it for 4 hours and having to, cheer on a team and all that stuff. So, it's crazy. But in a game like that, there's a lot of worry that you're going to keep the defense out on the field if the offense isn't able to produce, and with a freshman quarterback, what is that going to mean? Does that mean that Utah's going to have more 3 and outs? Does it mean that they're not going to be able to sustain that? And I think some of that was maybe the rhetoric from last year where Utah, there was a lot of 3 and outs, Bryson Barnes or Nate Johnson couldn't get the job done, couldn't move the ball, maybe you get a first down here or there, or maybe a couple. But it really was a situation where the Utah defense was stuck on the field a long time. This was a complete opposite, right? You had the offense on the field most of the time. That defense, they stayed fresh. They were able to do what they needed to in a very efficient and effective way, where you allowed them to only have the ball for 18 minutes essentially. Now, some of that is to Oklahoma State's, I don't know if I'd call it credit, but to how that they've run. They wanted to go really high tempo. Try to really work hard to be able to move that offense down the field. And you saw when it was working how quickly and how dynamic and efficient it can be, because they would be, at the 25-yard line and immediately get down to, the red zone in Utah's territory really quickly. But on the flip side, when it didn't work, and it didn't work most of the time, you're having drives that ended incredibly fast. Their first drive ended in 45 seconds. From that, they had a few drives that were a little bit more sustained, where they were 1 or 2 minutes, generally around 2 minutes. And then in succession, you had a 20-second drive that ended in an interception. So you can't fully say that one, but 20 seconds, another 20 seconds, 42 seconds. Oh, and then they have a 2 minute and 37 minute drive that didn't go anywhere. 54 seconds, 22 seconds, 35 seconds, and then 6 seconds with another interception. And that takes you to where they then eventually got on and got their 2 touchdowns. But this was a team that was trying to move very fast. They had 9 drives under a minute. Their average time of possession was 1 minute and 8 seconds. Utah, conversely, was 2 minutes and 49 seconds. So they did well with the job and did well. But kind of created their own problems in a lot of ways. But this Utah defense did a phenomenal job of being able to lock up Oklahoma State. They found ways to put pressure without fully bringing the house. They were in press coverage and trying to make sure that you could stop those wide receivers that going into this game everybody talked about as being some of the best receivers in the Big 12. And I'm not saying that they're not. You just had a Utah team that did a phenomenal job of the coverage, as well as putting enough pressure on Alan Bowman to make him feel that pressure and make him throw passes that weren't ever going to be completed. There's some throws that he had that I don't know if he was just throwing it up in a prayer. It looked like that from my angle, but he wasn't even close to some of these guys. And if he had a little bit more touch or maybe a little bit more time, maybe we're telling a different story. But they put enough pressure on him, even if it was simulated pressure. It was enough that it forced him into some really bad throws. Going into halftime, he was 8 of 22 for 89 yards and 1 interception. It was enough that Mike Gundy decided to bench him. A little wild decision, in my opinion. Gundy, maybe he acted a little rashly, but at the same time, he was getting boos from the fans. Things weren't going well. You wanted to kind of start something maybe a little bit more fresh and maybe see if you can get going. I'd heard comments from him afterward. I wasn't in his locker room, but I heard comments afterward that, he just wanted to give him a break and kind of get a reset. And, maybe there's some truth to that. I just think at the end of the day, Bowman just stunk. Like, point blank, he just wasn't good, and they needed something different. The problem is they didn't have anybody different that was going to be better, right? You had Garrett Rangel, who ended up being 3 of 11 for 31 yards. Nothing really great there. Utah it didn't matter what you threw at them. They were going to stop it. Yes, Bowman finishes, much better. He ended up with 206 yards and 2 touchdowns, and we've explained that one, and not taking away from that, obviously, he looked like a much better quarterback there, and I think maybe if they would have stayed with him going into halftime, maybe things change, right? Maybe you get more of a resurgence, but I don't know those conversations. Maybe in the locker room it was just another down motion from Bowman, and they felt like they had to do something. Whatever. The reality is that Utah found ways to pressure him enough that put him into mistakes. At the end of the day, Utah only had 1 sack, and now that doesn't sound like a ton considering what Utah has done this year, but Oklahoma State hasn't allowed a sack all year, and so you got 1 sack. It came in the second half. It was a good situation. They got 3 TFLs, but it really wasn't one of those things where there was a ton of action behind the line of scrimmage in terms of all these things you can look at. Oh, they hit him like 90 times or whatever. I mean, like, they were pressuring, so don't get me wrong, but this was a situation where they just did their job. They didn't have to get too fancy, and they made Bowman really struggle. So kind of cool to see there. Beyond that, obviously, Ollie Gordon, the big talk coming into the game was that Ollie Gordon was, going to be this dynamic rusher, and he is. So I'm not trying to take away from that. But there's clearly something plaguing him. He's not 100%. You can kind of see that. They haven't been fully forthcoming with that, at least that I haven't heard, or maybe teams are just playing him better. Personally, I think Utah did a good job of playing him, limiting what he was able to do. He had, I think, one long run. I think he was in the Wildcat, and it was for like 11 or 14 yards, and so worked well for him there. But outside of that, he really didn't do anything. He had, 48 or 42 yards on 11 carries. He only averaged 3.8 yards for the game. Had a mediocre grade from Pro Football Focus. It just wasn't a good day for him. And this is the third straight game where he's only averaged about 40, or he's been at about 42 yards. The first game of the season, he broke the 100-yard barrier. But this is not the same player that we saw last year that won the Doak Campbell Award and was this dynamic running back that rushed for a ton of yards. Maybe he picks it up. Kyle Whittingham kind of joked, I'm glad he saved it for another week so that he could go off on that later. The reality is that Utah schemed it well. They did everything they needed to be able to make sure that they could stop him. The DBs were doing a good job where you didn't have to over pursue, right, and get too creative. Not creative, but try to put a lot more pressure on them. This became a situation where Utah did its job on both ends. Up, in the run game where they stopped the runs, they were also able to have that great coverage, that tight coverage in the secondary where they were able to keep plays from being these big plays with Brennan Presley or something. It worked out very well for Utah in all facets of the game, and I think that more than anything is probably the highlight of what this Utah team is. Yes, Utah's defense has always been pretty crazy, but the fact that you're getting these guys that are new in the system and they are embracing it and thriving shows where this defense is improving, especially in the secondary, where if you can continue to see that development, there's not a lot that you can do to beat Utah. Not saying that you can't, right? Like, obviously, Utah can be beat. There's certain things that they still need to clean up, and tackling becomes an issue. I think Kyle said that they had 15 missed tackles, which is clearly far too many. But you've got a secondary that is doing a great job. You've got Alakai Gilman, the safety. He made some phenomenal plays. There was one play where they were trying to operate in a bubble screen situation. He kind of had a delayed motion to be able to kind of get in. And the way that he timed it was perfect where there was nobody there to block him. And so he was able to blow up the screen incredibly fast. It worked so effectively that was something that you have to know that was on tape, right? He did exactly what he needed to. He didn't get bogged down by some defender who was trying to, stop that and allow the screen to go for a ton of yards. He blew it up behind the line of scrimmage, and he knew exactly what that play was going to be. So you're seeing a guy that's starting to develop more into that. And he was great at Stanford, but I think you're getting him more comfortable in Utah's system. He actually graded out as the highest player in PFF for Utah on the defensive side, had an 84.9 grade. His coverage grade was a pretty impressive 90.6. But even more impressive than that is his NFL passer rating. To me, this is kind of what you look at for these DBs, more so than tackle. Tackles get thrown around for DBs for some reason. I don't understand what it is. You want to be able to have a low passer rating, and he had a 16.7. Even if you didn't know what that scale is, 1 through a million, 1 through 100, whatever, 16.7 clearly sounds like it's not great, and it wasn't, right? Like, throwing in his direction, it just didn't happen. He found ways to be able to stop it. It didn't work, and he did a great job with that. More impressive than that, though, at least in an NFL passer rating, was Elijah Scooby Davis. Obviously, he's the guy that stepped in when Kenan Johnson went down and got that starter minutes role. He's kind of splitting it with Cam Calhoun. The two of them are really kind of doing it as a two-man job in terms of tag teaming that. But he comes in and he had an 8.3 NFL passer rating. You just didn't get a ball on him. And if I remember right, he also had another interception this game and did a great job. You're starting to see improvement. He's one of the standouts, in my opinion, of that defense of what he was able to do. He's not going to probably get a lot of the praise from that, but I think you're seeing a guy that's starting to develop. He's starting to understand what it is. The reality is it just came down to live reps, right? You can do things in practice, you can do things in simulated situations, but he's now doing it at a level that it's real. The game tape is there. He's got things that he can improve on. Is he perfect? No. Just like a lot of the secondary. But I think you're seeing individual strides being made from a week to week progress. And if he's able to continue that, this becomes a big asset for Utah because this became their weakest area, especially when Kennan went down. Kyle Whittingham said he wasn't too worried about it. Maybe if you talk to Sharif Shah, he was a little bit more worried, mostly because the experience value. But you're finding a guy that is coming in there, he's putting in the work, he understands that it's his moment to shine, and if he doesn't live up to that, he's going to get passed over by somebody else, and he's living up to that. And that's exactly what you want to see. That's a great opportunity for Utah. If you can get all three phases of this defense hitting, at a high level, there's not much you can do in the Big 12 against Utah. There's going to be some teams that are going to test Utah, right? But at the same time, these aren't the same type of teams that Utah has seen in the Pac-12, where you had the Caleb Williams, the Michael Penix Juniors, where a lot of it was very air raidish type systems where they were just passing nonstop, and Utah had ways to stop that. This is becoming a little bit more different, and Utah's finding unique wrinkles in these types of offenses, but they're doing well. And if they can continue to do that, especially with a Karene Reed out, who is kind of that quarterback of the defense, where he's able to just kind of add that communication. You've heard what I've said about that. That only bodes so well for Utah, and it's a great situation for them. And so, kudos to that defense. They're the true winners of the game, right? Obviously, Utah's offense had to be effective in there, and Isaac Wilson is going to get credit for that game, and for good reason. But the real story of that game is that defense. The defense did a phenomenal job of limiting what Oklahoma State was able to do. Yes, the score looks closer, but at the end of the day, this was one of the best performances from a Utah defense that I've seen in some time, and it honestly can be better, and which is crazy. You get Connor O'Toole back on the field. What does that do? You get Karene Reed back on the field, which it's not sounding like he's going to be back anytime soon. I don't know what that timeline looks like. It's not season ending, but you hope to get him back on the field. At the end of the day, though, you're continually getting more guys, younger guys, less experienced guys in the system, and you're just adding more to your depth, right? If anything can be kind of a positive from last year is you got a lot of guys reps, and you're getting some of that now, not to that same level, but you're getting some guys reps now, and kudos to that defense for what they're able to do. So transitioning to the offensive side of the ball, Isaac Wilson is obviously, like I said, he's going to be the name that everybody is talking about from that game, and for good reason, right? Like, you have a freshman quarterback that even in a defensive performance that Utah had, you still have to move the ball. And, Utah wasn't perfect on offense. They left a lot of points on the board, and I haven't gone through to calculate, what I estimated could be the points on board. Just suffice it to say that it was a fair amount and at least 10, right? And I think that's an accurate portrayal of that. And that game is a completely different game if Utah's up 32. 32 is a weird score for football. Let's just not do that. 35. Let's say you go 35 or even 31. That's probably a more natural score with field goals and stuff. This becomes much more of a demoralizing loss for Oklahoma State, right? Do they make that rally at the end? Do they even want to try? Who knows? So it all goes into that, and that's something that this offense is going to have to learn, especially if Isaac is going to continue to play more. But just starting with that. So Cam Rising, this was frustrating. All week, Cam Rising, at least the first 2 days of the week, he was taking all the practice reps. He was the guy, right? He was getting all that. Throughout the week, they were as normal, especially, Wednesday, Thursday, you're giving a little bit more to Isaac just to give him some reps. But it started shifting to that as Cam was taking out stitches and getting, improving from his hand injury, or taking the next steps, I should say, that they felt like they needed to get Isaac more reps. And he ended up taking the majority of the reps, if not all the reps, for the remainder of the week, indicating that he's probably going to be the guy. But at the same time, everything that I'd heard from, credible people and everything is that it was going to be Cam that was going to give it a go. Now, that doesn't mean that Cam was going to stay in the game. The indications that I were given is that Cam was going to give it a go, see what he can do. Yes, it was a game time decision. They were going to throw him out there and see what happened. Even, down to the time that he had been on the field and thrown, the indication was still that he was the expected starter. That doesn't mean that he was going to be the starter, but he was the expected starter. So, that's kind of how it all shook out. And I understand how frustrating that is because I was just as frustrated. If you followed me on Twitter, you understand how frustrated I was because it's just a game that you spend a whole week trying to figure out this, and it didn't go your way. And, I wasn't alone. There were several other media members that were in a similar situation, and that's just the nature of this business. We do our best to give you the information that we can, but at the end of the day, it comes down to whatever the team is going to do, right? And Kyle Whittingham explained this a little bit after the game and said that Cam just didn't have the velocity. He at least explained that part on it on Monday, saying he didn't have the velocity or the zip, as he called it, in his throwing motions. And you could see that, right? I tweeted that you could see that Cam could make the throws. He can do it, but he looked a little slower. He wasn't able to kind of have that immediate quick release and getting there. It was a situation where, I don't know anything, but for me, you could play him, but you're opening yourself up to far more risk in the sense that, he's going to have a slower release. Is that going to make him, second guess some of the things that he's doing? It just became apparent for Utah, especially that Isaac Wilson was going to be your best fit. And I don't know, I don't know those internal conversations in terms of how worried they were with that. Yes, Isaac Wilson just won on the road at Utah State, but it's a far different situation going up against a team that's ranked in a hostile environment for all those reasons that I mentioned previously with their, you've beat ranked teams in a consistent streak. You just don't lose at home, those types of things. And, they still turned it over to Isaac, which one shows their trust in him. And in some respects, if you feel like you have no other option, you have to. I get that. But it shows their level of trust in him and what they were able to do. They didn't fully, shy away from allowing him to make plays. It's not like they said, we're just going to run the ball 900 times and maybe, Isaac, you can go throw the ball 5 times. They put him in situations where, he was expected to develop, and you're starting to see that development from him. He said that he learned minutes before kickoff that he was playing. I mean, I think you have a sneaking suspicion and you're going to do it. And, in the previous weeks and in all of our media interviews that he's had with us, he talks about how he has to stay ready and be ready for those moments. And so I think you're seeing a different level of preparation from him than even beginning in the season where you're expected to be the backup, and when you get thrown in, you're either in garbage minutes or you're in for a few reps to help a guy who's coming out for the game or whatever. You're starting to see a much different level of preparation for Isaac, and you're starting to also see a lot more comfortability with him. He's coming into these games where I don't know that he thinks that he can absolutely just beat you, but at the same time, he doesn't look like you're going to beat him, if that makes sense. He comes into these games with an air of confidence, knowing that he can be better, but understanding that he's going to put his best foot out there, and it's going to do what it is, and he's going to find a way to win. And you're getting that, right? Like there's still limitations, right? You're seeing it. He still doesn't have the right touch. This week he was underthrowing passes rather than overthrowing them, so it's still kind of fine tuning that touch. But at the same time, I mean, he did what he needed to do. You look at his numbers and you look at somebody like an Arch Manning, who is this, highly touted quarterback in Texas, obviously for multiple reasons. They had roughly about the same stat line. It wasn't the same, so I'm not going to try to compare Isaac Wilson to an Arch Manning, but you're seeing a guy that is having similar numbers to this highly touted guy that is expected to take over this, dominant program. That's what Utah's at right now with Isaac Wilson. They see the future with him. They see what it can look like with some more development, with some more reps, and with some more, film study, all those kinds of things. That's only going to improve. And, he did have 2 interceptions in this game. One of those, honestly, the safety just did a phenomenal job. Got there much quicker than anybody expected. Anybody in that stadium, it was this kind of weird moment where he threw the ball and it looked like it was perfectly in stride to Dijon Stanley, and it was. And so it was like, okay, Dijon made the play and then just went out of bounds because the safety didn't even look like he intercepted the ball. Even the way he ran off, everything just looked kind of odd. And so when he had the ball, the complete reaction of the crowd changed, and you saw an incredible safety go again, or the safety get the interception against Isaac Wilson. That, there's techniques, and Kyle talked about it on Monday about what you can do to kind of help that situation. They honestly didn't think the safety would get there that quickly. They didn't think he was fully to that side of the field, and they felt they had room. But, it's a learning moment, and it's something now you've seen on tape and you can work with. The second one, he was being pressured from the blind side, if I remember correctly, just threw a bad pass. It happens. It was one of those where those ones are probably more of your freshman mistakes, but not one that really is giving anybody heartburn. And I understand it didn't do anything in the game. Had Oklahoma State gone down and gotten a touchdown or something like that, sure, maybe there's some worry. But Utah feels very confident in what they've got, that they feel like even if Isaac makes these, quote-unquote freshman mistakes or has these issues, they've got a defense that is going to stop them in whatever they need to do. And what a luxury that is to be able to have that kind of situation where you can come in and say, okay, for however long Isaac is going to be the starter, we've got a great system where we can let him work out his mistakes while still understanding that we've got a defense that's going to do everything we need to. So you're seeing much more calm and collected Kyle Whittingham in relation to a freshman quarterback. In years past, they're throwing up mistakes or having some problems, and there's a little bit more worry and maybe a little bit more concern. Maybe not concern. I don't want to put that in there because I don't think Kyle ever had mentioned that, especially with like a Tyler Huntley or something like that. But I think it's more just, right now he feels like they're in a spot where they can be comfortable. You're not having to worry about a USC. You're not worrying about an Oregon. But to that same degree, you did this against an Oklahoma State on the road, and there still didn't seem to be a worry. Now, put him on the field, and maybe it's a different question. But, he seems very, very different about how he's handling Isaac, and it's kind of been interesting to watch. But still a true freshman, still coming in there, trying to do what he needs to get this Utah team to win. He has to be better, especially if he wants to remain the starter. Not that he's going to lose his job. That's not what I'm saying. But if he wants to continue to maintain his job as a starter, he's got to continue to improve, and you're going to get these opportunities where as a freshman you can make some of these mistakes. But at the end of the day, like, he's already further along than many quarterbacks that we've seen. His pocket presence is great. He's not afraid to stay in there, even though he knows he might take a hit. He's not, panicking. He's going through his checkdowns, and there's still some development there, and diagnosing the defense and kind of how they're setting up and kind of where you can see it and kind of projecting what they're going to do. Those types of things are going to come, and he's getting in the film room a ton to do that. So, you're going to get that. At the end of the day, this continues to be reps. But there was an interesting thing that I found. I think it was a CBS guy, I'm blanking right now on who tweeted this out, but it said that Utah was one of the, I think it was the fifth highest most, or I don't even know how to say that, the fifth team that has seen the most stacked boxes. There you go. They have seen a ton of stacked boxes. These defenses are coming out and they're trying to put a ton of pressure on Utah, and yet Isaac is still able to do it in that situation. To me, that becomes, a much better indication of who he is as a quarterback. You're going to look at his stat line, 17 of 29, 207 yards, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions, yada, yada, yada. And that's great. Like, it's a great stat line, and you'd be happy to have that, especially with a win against a ranked team. But I think it's more the fact that he's able to do that with a stacked box. Number 9, Trey Rucker on Oklahoma State, and he was everywhere for them. He was, just blowing up everything that Utah wanted to do. And Isaac and Mekhi Bernard, and I'll talk about him in a second, they were finding ways to just get away from him as much as possible, but he found his way everywhere. If not for Rucker, I think this is a completely different game. And Rucker was the highest graded defender on the team at the 91.3. It was just an incredible performance. But he was a guy that was a big disruptor of what Utah wanted to do. Had he not been there, I think this team, is far more efficient. Now it's easy to say that as like, well, if this one player wasn't here, yeah, I get that. But you see like how close Utah was to being a much better team. You also see how much closer that if they had their starting D end, how much harder it could be. I get that. It's both sides of that coin. But you're seeing that they were still managing to be able to do that with a stacked box. That offensive line handled it very well. After, that first game of the season where there was a lot of concerns about your two tackles, Spencer Fano and Caleb Lomu, and then allowing inside pressure and not really kind of containing as well as they needed to, they stepped up in a big way this week and were some of the highest graded players on offense. I think they were the third through fifth highest. Spencer Fano, Jaron Kump, and Caleb Lomu. They did a great job of being able to protect. They're a big reason why Isaac can remain composed in that pocket. He's not running for his life because he's got the guys up front that have been absolutely instrumental in doing what they need to. And, that's not to take away from a Michael Mokofisi or a Tanoa Koiai. This is an entire offensive unit that was doing very well and is probably one of the best that it's been all season. You have to think that this continued to be a good sign for Utah, especially with an Oklahoma State defense that was going to, be a little bit more challenging than some of these other teams in the conference. And there's other ones out there that'll be better, probably Iowa State. But for the most part, that's on par with what Utah is going to face. And so if you're seeing a team or an offensive line do that against a team like that, that generally is going to bode well. Once again, it's a week-to-week thing. I talked to Spencer Fano yesterday about it. He takes a lot of pride in that. He understood he wasn't where he needed to be after that first week, and he's absolutely improved to get to where he needs to. That's the same with a lot of these other guys. So at the end of the day, this was a good offensive showing from that side. The offensive line has to start in the trenches. You've got to be physical. If you're going to continue to see these stacked boxes, you have to continue to maintain it and do what you need to, and they're doing their job. And then Isaac has to continue to make that progress. He's expected to be the starter this week. I don't think I'm breaking any news here based on how things have developed, but we can get more into that this week as we talk about Arizona on Thursday. But more offensive players. Mekhi Bernard honestly had his coming out party. I know we've had some of these to some extent with him, but I feel like this was the game where he started to separate himself as kind of Utah's RB1. Now, there's a little caveat there. Utah isn't fully investing in him as an RB1, at least right now. Kyle says he's still kind of a 20 to 25 carry type player. Some of that is they want to preserve him and keep him healthy through the rest of the season. It's also just kind of where he is. That's what they see. They want to make sure that he's getting enough touches to make an impact in the game, but that they're not overusing him to the point where Utah has nobody after that, right? Beyond that, you have Mike Mitchell. I'm excited to see what Mike Mitchell is able to do. His injury has limited him a little bit in what he is able to do, but you can see some of the progressions that he's making. Still a freshman. It's a redshirt freshman, but he's still getting some good reps out there and will get better. But you're seeing a Mekhi Bernard who is finally taking hold of this team and really kind of owning the moment, right? And he's very confident in his abilities, but he understands that it's taken a ton of work to get here, and now he's kind of finally seeing the fruits of that and being able to get to where he needs to be. But he finishes with 25 carries, so right at that max line that Kyle Whittingham would like, for 182 yards, 7.3 yards per average. Once again, that number, if you can get 7 yards per carry, that's going to do great things for Utah, and that's exactly what they would love to have. People love to point out, well, he had a 62-yard run. Yeah, but he's done that in back-to-back weeks. He's continually finding ways to do this. That's what you want as your running back. You're not asking him, once again, to take a knee once he just gets to 7 yards. You're asking him to do as much as he possibly can. So I have to say that 62-yard run, beyond the 3, 4, 5 broken tackles that he had, it was pretty remarkable to see that little stutter step as he, sees that guy on the ground and sends him to his grave, essentially, and just, hauls down that sideline. It was you're seeing a little bit more of the dynamic nature of who Mackay can be, especially when you get him in space. But he has bulked up. He's added some size to him. He's finding ways to get out of those tackles, whether it be through spins or whether it be through physicality. This week was the spins and some other stuff. Last week was his stiff arms against Utah State. This is a running back that is really kind of coming into his own and still young. When he joined Utah, he was 17. He was young, so he's not that old coming into this, and he's Utah's best option right now in the run game. He also recognizes that there's things that he can improve on. He actually apologized at the end of the press conference on Saturday, saying that his 2 fumbles he obviously needs to clean up, and that's on him. He had one that was that was close. It was almost a catch, but or they called it a catch, and which led to a fumble. It was close, but he understands that, and then he understands that he missed a pickup on a blitz. That was the one that Isaac threw his second interception. He feels like if he would have picked that up, Isaac would have had a better opportunity to not make that play. And maybe Isaac still throws it. I don't know. But you're seeing these guys kind of tag team each other, right? They understand that each is vital to be able to have success on the team. They all talk about do your 1/11th. That's exactly true, and you're seeing that more, and you're seeing some camaraderie with these players where they're feeding off each other. I pointed out to another member of the media on Saturday that the press conference on Saturday just felt like a bunch of guys that were best friends hanging out, talking about the game. They're really loose, they're comfortable, they're happy with each other, they feed off each other, and you're seeing a team that understands that it can beat anybody. Now, once again, that all has to show up on the field, and you can't get too high on yourself, but this is a team that definitely feels like they can go through this Big 12 and do some damage. Outside of that, Dorian Singer, man, what an incredible performance from him. 7 catches, 95 yards. He had 49 yards after catch. Was the highest graded player on offense. He was everything for Isaac Wilson. Everything that they wanted to do, he was able to be there, including a one-handed grab on his helmet. That still, he said after the game that it wasn't the craziest catch he's ever had. I still don't believe that. But he claims that he's got other ones, and I'm really fascinated to know what those would be. But he's really starting to develop as Utah's top wide receiver. He's talking a lot of that smack to the DBs. He's going in there, he's getting up, and he's emotionally charged. That's what you want to see from these guys. You want to see that emotion. You want to see that swagger, so to speak, and you're getting that out of him. If you can get more of that out of these players, it just feeds on itself, right? Where these guys start feeling much more confidence. It's not, I'm going to go catch a 20-yard pass and then go walk to the sidelines. They're now having fun with it. And as much as football is all about the fundamentals and it's all about, doing the things right that you've done through practice, there is a lot of that momentum / swagger type stuff that absolutely helps the game. And when you're feeling good, you play good, right? It's simple, right? That doesn't mean everything's going to go perfect, but there's a lot more opportunities for you to perform at a high level because you're doing it in a way that is effective. So he becomes a great asset again. Brant Keithy, once again, always does well. 4 catches, 75 yards, 32 yards after catch or after contact. This is not contact, catch. That's running. Whatever, you get it. We've talked a lot about him. He's obviously going to continue to produce. This was a game though that was probably the lowest number of receivers that have been hit. 5 receivers were targeted, and so you still want to see Isaac spread the ball around a little bit. But if you can have effective days like from Dorian Singer, Brant Keithy, Money Parks, things are going to be fine, right? So you're doing well. You've got a lot of assets, a lot of weapons to throw to, and things are going well. You've got Isaac, who's willing to take it on 3rd and 4th downs and make plays with his body, had a few breakaway runs. There's a couple of plays. I thought early on when I think Utah went for it for the first time on 4th down inside the red zone, and he scrambled to pick up the 4th down. That absolutely changed the tone of the game for Utah as well. I think when you see a quarterback that's willing to make plays like that, and, we've seen with Cam, you can't be reckless with it, but when you see a quarterback that's willing to make the plays for the team, it just it fires them up, right? Like it gives them some confidence and some trust in you, and they play harder for you because they see that you're willing to fight for it as well. So a lot of good things from this game. Once again, I'm hoping to get a special guest that will be joining me. We just haven't been able to connect with his schedule for football. He is a football player. It just hasn't been able to work based on kind of how the schedule is shaped up yet. So I'm hoping to get him out here and we can chat and kind of get his personality and takes on the game. But we'll get there. So in the meantime, you're stuck with me. I'm sorry. Kudos to you for sticking with me if you listen this whole time. So happy to chat about these things. We're going to continue to develop these and talk more as the season progresses with all these games. But we'll talk on Thursday about the preview of Arizona game, and there's some fun stuff there. So with that, I'm going to sign off today, and we will chat later this week. Have a great one as we gear up for Utah in dark mode against Arizona.